Of all the cities in Syria conquered by ISIS, few experienced more death and destruction than Kobane and Raqqa, located in the autonomous region of Rojava. With Syria facing the prospect of a new civil war in 2025, I wanted to see what life in these cities is like now, before conflict breaks out yet again. I'm standing in the square of Arin Merkan in the city of Kobani. Kobani is one of the largest cities in northeast Syria, just a few hundred meters away from Turkey. And in 2014, it was the site of one of the worst battles against ISIS. The extremists, having spread their caliphate rapidly across northeast Syria, launched an all-out assault on the city in September of 2014. In the first couple of weeks of conflict, around 150,000 people fled, but not before ISIS managed to execute a few hundred of them. In the past 10 years, the residents of Kobani have returned, and they've tried to rebuild their city, but now they face a new threat: Turkey and Turkish-backed militias. The demolished buildings, remnants of tanks and mortars you see around me, constitutes Kobani's war museum. This part of the town, which is just a few hundred meters away from the Turkish border, has been left untouched as a reminder of the sacrifices that were made to liberate the city of Kobani from ISIS, and also of the threat and the destruction caused by Turkey. Behind me you can see the Turkish flag maybe 300, 400 meters away. The Turkish border is stationed right behind the war museum, and we're told that if we start to walk down this road, there's a high chance that we will be shot by snipers. This so-called museum still occupies a huge part of the city. The few buildings left standing are pockmarked with bullet holes. Rusted shells of vehicles and heavy weapons litter the streets. Now, with the sector largely abandoned, nature is steadily reclaiming the land. Dogs, cats, sheep and chickens have all made their homes in what remains of these obliterated structures. But beyond the occasional bleat and bark, and the crunch of rubble underfoot, it is eerily silent here. A couple of residents of Kobani are taking us through the outer edges of the war museum to show us around, show us where some of the worst battles took place, and show us where the commander of the SDF was killed fighting ISIS. Facing annihilation, Rojava's Kurdish People's Protection Units, the YPG and all-female YPJ, fought tooth and nail to prevent ISIS from conquering the whole city. With their backs against the Turkish border, the fighting devolved into horrific close-quarter combat. Every building became an ambush site, every alleyway a potential killing field. I was grateful to have a local to help me negotiate this apocalyptic landscape, because unexploded ordnance still remains under the debris. My guide explained how Kobani's defenders were forced to go house to house, confronting the jihadists as the US began pounding ISIS command centers with airstrikes. As if to prove his point about the brutality of the combat, moments later, my guide ushered me into a rubble-filled crater. This, he said, was once a building used by ISIS as a field hospital, until it was targeted in an American strike. Within a few seconds of pulling away rocks and broken bits of building, he was holding up chunks of what was unmistakably human bone. Moments later, he produced 3 vertebrae of a jihadist's spinal column, along with parts of skull and what looked like a jawbone. After I inspected the chunks of skeleton, my new friend let them tumble to the ground. Then, my interpreters, who grew up with the horrors of ISIS on their doorstep, stood on the bones and ground them into the dirt as we left. Clearly, the people of Rojava are still plagued by the memory of life under ISIS rule, but they are also dedicated to honouring those who sacrificed everything for their freedom. After leaving the War Museum, I headed for the Martyred Families Centre, a facility that provides support to the loved ones of people killed fighting ISIS and in other conflicts, including Turkey's ruthless military operations. Here, there is a memorial hall where a headshot of every fighter who has perished on the front lines is framed and displayed. It was in this immensely sobering location, wallpapered by the faces of the dead, that I met a woman named Kalima. She had the unenviable job of cleaning the corpses and helping their families prepare them for burial.
اتبعت شرطة يعني کار هری زحمت سر ملی اندام سازی مالباتی شهیدا بن جبر کو تدمی انسان هکی را بدی بستنی تدمی ناسنامه شهیده کی دین تجی پرس بکی و تپش رو توی بخواه کفن بکی و باشیری يعني وانا جيب ما ورقات كره ما جيب دين وما جيب كفان ذكرن وما جيب شورتن وما جيب كرنا عردي ايه توري زحمت يعني ام سازي ام هم ايشيجي مالباتا دكشينن ام هم ايشيجي وانا وقتي شي دكتور ددرونو كفان بكن
It came at a huge cost, but on January the 26th, 2015, the ISIS scourge was expelled from Kobani and the city was officially declared liberated. Within weeks, tens of thousands of residents had returned and the war-torn community set about rebuilding. Now, although the battle scars are still clearly visible, Kobani's centre is vibrant and bustling once again. Children play in parks and sports fields, and shops once stocking the niqab can sell resplendent, colourful dresses. Although roughly 70% of the infrastructure was damaged in the battle to liberate Kobani, ISIS never managed to conquer the entire city. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Raqqa. This city, located further south in Rojava on the banks of the Euphrates River, was completely overrun by ISIS and served as its stronghold in Syria from 2014 until the group was eventually forced out in 2017.
This busy intersection is called Naim Square in Raqqa. This is the scene that ISIS used to broadcast its brutality to the world and to show the other civilians here what would happen to them if they did not fall in line. This square behind me is where many people were executed, beheaded, and their heads placed on pikes and steel rebar surrounding the square.
Much like in Kobani, Kurdish troops were forced to go house to house under fire from heavy weapons, IEDs, and suicide bombers to eliminate the jihadists, while US drones and warplanes struck from above. Now, where the extremists once tortured and executed their captives for the world to see, families and friends are free to relax and meet to simply watch the world pass by, just like they did before ISIS arrived. But because Raqqa was under total ISIS control and the efforts to oust them covered the whole city, the destruction here was absolute. Not only do you see the fallout of war everywhere, you experience it with your other senses. Much of the city remains without power and hot water, and desperate refugees have no choice but to burn plastic and rubbish to keep warm. Before long, my nose became stuffy and my throat itchy, thanks in part to the toxic smoke, but also the thick dust that coats every surface. This is the pulverized remnants of destroyed buildings, which are whipped up by the slightest breeze and blown into your stinging, irritated eyes. Of all the places I visited during my time in Rojava, Raqqa was where I felt the most uneasy. Perhaps I was simply not used to witnessing such devastation, but the atmosphere felt tense, as though chaos could break out again at a moment's notice. For the people of Rojava, though, this feeling is nothing new. Since former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was overthrown in December 2024 by the Islamist rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, Rojava's democratic administration has had to consider the very real possibility of another civil war. In the meantime, parts of the region are still under attack from Turkish-backed militias and Turkish airstrikes. This is because Turkey is desperate to undermine Kurdish autonomy and sees the Kurdish militia defending Rojava as terrorists. Ironically, Turkey and its proxy forces have conducted several attacks on Rojava's civilian populations in recent years. Now they're fighting to take control of the Tishreen Dam, a vital piece of infrastructure that provides electricity to a huge part of the region.
We were at this very square in Kobani just hours ago and it was almost silent. Now the square is heaving with thousands of people protesting ongoing hostilities at the Tishreen Dam. We were invited to join a civilian convoy that was headed to the dam just yesterday, and we declined because we didn't have any personal protection equipment with us. It turns out that our choice was vindicated because several people were killed in drone strikes perpetrated by Turkish-backed militias and the Turkish Air Force. Now, thousands of people are here to commemorate the memory of the people killed and to protest the ongoing war.
People of all ages, genders and ethnicities had taken to the streets, and as I navigated my way through the sea of protesters, it quickly became clear this was not simply an anti-war demonstration. It was an outpouring of rage and grief from a population beleaguered by years of conflict.
And tell us why you're here today.
ام في درج بو إيريشي هاني سر حوالي ماي درباسي بندابة تشرين يبوي ام رابونه چقاس بالا فری داگر کریا ترک سر مهبه چقاس مخینن لبرخدان جیان تجاری ام پاشتا ناکشن.
Everyone we've spoken to so far seems to describe the situation as everybody being involved in the resistance, because everybody knows a brother, a daughter, a son, a sister who has been injured or killed. Can you tell me about the feeling here today? What do you feel when you march, and what do the people around you feel?
دمي ام درد كافن ماشي ما وفاتشتي ما جبو قال ما ام درد كافن او شهيد بكافن ام شهيد بكافن وكافن شهيد جي روماتن شهيد جي هاني ام هيزا خجوانا دقرن شهيد امانه ام تجاري باشتا ناكشن او نام شهيد ما دخن وداره هاني سيفيل لفه داره اما خونه وانا راكنه وتجاري جي باشتا كشاندن تنبامه.
And do you have a final message that you want to tell people who are listening to this?
مسج ما جبو عالم جشكي جبو حمو دولت هاني خا إنسانيات دا دبينه ودبيجه ام پشت إنسانيات دانه ام دبيجن ون كدرنه ون كرن كافا ورقص إنسان شهيد دكافه إنسان هاني سيفيل شكافن.
As the protesters began their march, I couldn't help but think what my fate might have been had I travelled to the dam with their countrymen and women. I decided to visit Kobani's sprawling cemetery, where the people killed the day before were being laid to rest.
We are walking through the cemetery of Kobani, where thousands upon thousands of white tombs hold the corpses of people who were killed in the battle for Kobani against ISIS, but also in fighting across the region. The authorities here have just opened a brand new section of the cemetery for people who have been killed in the past few weeks, fighting against Turkish-backed forces and who have been killed by Turkish airstrikes. The cemetery is striking for a couple of reasons. One is because, as you can see behind me, you're confronted with thousands and thousands of faces of people who've been killed here in the past few years, but also because it is the only place that we've seen since our time began here in Rojava that hasn't been demolished by some kind of fighting or some kind of bomb. Behind me, you should be able to see the scale of the cemetery and just how large it is. But if you look on this side, you can see that the authorities here and the administrators here have been forced to level some new land to build yet more graves and more plots. These gravestones are likely to be filled in the coming days and weeks because of the ongoing hostilities. And the reason we're choosing to film in this direction is because behind us there is a grieving family who have just laid to rest another person who was killed at the Syrian dam just yesterday.
After paying my respects at the cemetery, I left Kobani and went to interview Rojava's political leaders. But as I drove south through the Syrian desert, I witnessed firsthand the danger people here are subjected to every single day.
We're driving on the road out of Kobani through the town of Syrian. We heard a pretty significant explosion. We looked out the window, and a few kilometers away, a huge dust cloud coming up through the hills, not far away from our position, and then moments later, there was a second blast. The explosions were a few kilometers away from our car, so we're not too worried, but it is a pretty good reminder of the daily threats that the people living here face.
Fortunately, I avoided any more airstrikes and made it safely to meet the leaders of Rojava's governing body, the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria.
We are in Raqqa, outside the Executive Council of the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. We're here today because we've managed to secure an interview with the two co-chairs who lead the region. We're going to talk to them about the system of governance they've created here, how they managed to administer a region in the midst of such chaos from ISIS and various other threats they face, and we're going to talk to them about what they think the future holds for Syria and the region.
Rojava is often referred to as the Middle East's democratic experiment because of the unique nature of its governance system. Rather than power being centralised with a single entrenched president or a handful of politicians and clerics, the region is divided into several cantons, whose councils have near complete independence to manage their own affairs. This ensures all ethnic and religious components of Rojava's diverse population have a say in the decision-making process. My interviewees, the administration's co-chairs, are responsible for coordinating across the cantons and implementing feedback from the councils below them.
هذه التجربة هي فريدة وتجربة جديدة، ولكن استطعنا من خلال هذه التجربة أن نحافظ على التماسك المجتمعي، وخاصة بعد دحر تنظيم داعش، وحافظنا على وحدة الشعوب الموجودة في هذه المنطقة وتماسكها. الخوف كان من انقسام المجتمع في هذه المنطقة عقب اعتداءات داعش، لكن نتيجة هذا المشروع ونتيجة هذه الهيكلية الموجودة في هذا المشروع صراحة استطعنا أن يكون هناك تآخي، أن يكون هناك محبة بين هذه الشعوب، بين هذه المكونات. واليوم نلاحظ ثمرة هذا المشروع.
المميز بهاي الإدارة أنه إدارة شمال وشرق سوريا ما تتخذ القرار عن أي كانتون أو عن أي هيئة، وهذا اللي يميز إدارتنا ممكن عن الإدارة الموجودة بكل سوريا، ممكن بكتير دول. شمال وشرق سوريا ممكن تصدر بعض التعاميم أو القرارات اللي تكون مشتركة بين المواطنين كل، بس ولكن بعد المشاورة واتخاذ الآراء يتم اتخاذ القرارات. مشان هيك يعني نحن ما عنا أي يعني ما كان عنا أي بشكل عملي إنه نحن نفرض أي قرار على أي كانتون أو على أي هيئة.
The administration was founded kind of in the wake of the Arab Spring uprisings and the start of the Syrian civil war. But very quickly, a much greater threat emerged in ISIS. Your values are very much the antithesis, like the complete opposite to the values that ISIS have. And obviously, your region was forced to make a huge sacrifice in order to defeat them geographically, but you are continuing to fight them ideologically. How do you try to build social success, build a functioning, strong society, build economic success while fighting such a difficult war at the same time? How do you manage those resources?
أولاً موضوع محاربة داعش هو موضوع كان مهم جداً بصراحة. يعني استطعنا بالإدارة الذاتية بفضل طبعاً قوات سوريا الديمقراطية اندحر هذا التنظيم عسكرياً، لكن مثل ما تفضلت إيديولوجياً ما زال في هناك بقايا أفكار داعش. هذا يشكل خطر أيضاً، يعني بأن فكرة داعش ما تزال موجودة. نحن بحاجة إلى تضافر جميع الجهود من أجل القضاء على داعش إيديولوجياً وفكرياً، هذا كثير مهم. نتحدث بكل صراحة، هذه الإدارة هناك دائماً محاربة لها من قبل الدولة التركية، فالدولة التركية دائماً تحاول ضرب الاستقرار في مناطق الإدارة الذاتية، وهذا ما شهدناه طوال الفترات السابقة ابتداء من تأسيس هذه الإدارة، ودائما هناك اعتداءات ضد هذه الإدارة. يجب إيقاف إطلاق النار، ويجب على الدول الأوروبية وعلى رأسها طبعا أيضا فرنسا وبريطانيا أن تقف في مخططات الدولة التركية في هذا الخصوص في سوريا.
Having discussed the difficulties of facing ISIS and the threat of Turkey and Turkish-backed militias, I wanted to know the co-chair's position on Syria's new rulers, HTS, an Islamist group that developed from al-Qaeda.
بوشي سوري هاتا بي حالك وإيرم تدا جيانتكن نها دهندور السوري دا قهرتنا كجنك مازن تشيبو هلوش عندنا رجيمة بعث شخصي أسد تشيبو دهندور الشامي دا إيرو ربابرية كا دنكي هيا أفري ربابرية دنكي أجر بكار راستيجي هريك يجمع بدي حيس كرنكو أو مواطنك السورية ما فيوي تاجي دارن ياجي باراستينا هل بتو هركس خطيته ببيني وببي بشر جوا سوريا يعني برياد 2011 ميناك يعني تجاري كرد نهات نديتن وكي مكونة كي أصيد هندور السوريا ده.
HTS, we know what their origins are. We know what HTS has developed from. They have said recently that they are aiming to guarantee the safety and security of all these different groups. But their history obviously does not match the claims that they've said. They've tried to rehabilitate themselves on the world stage and present a new face. Are you hopeful that they will be able to follow through on those promises? Or are you still, are there big concerns over whether that will actually come true?
المرحلة المقبلة تنتظر بصراحة ليست الأقوال، إنما الأفعال هي التي تترجم هذه الأقوال. يعني نحن ننتظر أن يكون هناك أولا تمثيل لكل المكونات في الحكومة الانتقالية أو هيئة الانتقالية. وأيضا ننتظر أن يكون هناك مشاركة للجميع، ونتمنى أن تكون حقيقة الإدارة الجديدة بقيادة أحمد الشرع صادقة في نواياها أيضا بالعمل من أجل بناء سوريا جديدة تكون تمثل كل السوري.
My time with the co-chairs was complete, but before leaving the compound, I asked them whether they had anything to say to the international community and to tell me what they hope the future holds for the people of Rojava and all of Syria.
أول شيء نحن نوجه رسالة لكل العالم بأن أولا رفع العقوبات عن سوريا والمساهمة في إعادة الإعمار وتحقيق الاستقرار هو شرط ضروري لتحقيق سوريا ديمقراطية في النهاية، لكي لا يكون هناك بيئة يعني تستفيد منها الجماعات الراديكالية أو داعش. نتمنى على العالم أن يساعد السوريين كمساعدة، وأن في بناء مستقبلهم وتقديم العون والمشورة. نحن تخلصنا من الهيمنة الإيرانية في سوريا، لا نريد أن يكون هناك هيمنة لدول إقليمية أخرى، وأذكر هنا تركيا. أيضا على الدول الأوروبية أن تقوم بهذا الدور وتوقف الأطماع التركية في سوريا، وأن تتركنا نعيش بسلام.